The evening air hung warm and still over Mar-a-Lago as Donald Trump settled into the deep leather embrace of his favorite armchair. The golden light from the setting sun filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows over the room. In one corner, a group of aides hovered over a low table, their voices hushed but urgent. Screens lined the walls, each tuned to a different international news channel. Despite the calm facade, an undercurrent of tension buzzed in the air, as if everyone in the room waited for something they both expected and feared. Trump leaned forward, eyes fixed on the largest screen. He had spent years mastering the art of public image, of reading reactions and adjusting his own responses. He felt comfortable, even confident, when he controlled the message. Yet tonight, something felt different. He could sense a shift in the atmosphere, a suggestion that the usual playbook might not work. His aides, usually brimming with certainty, exchanged worried glances. One of them, a trusted advisor with a reputation for blunt honesty, leaned in and whispered, "Sir, you might want to brace yourself. This could get messy." Across thousands of miles in the heart of Ouagadougou, Captain Ibrahim Traoré paced the floor of a modest broadcast studio. The walls were painted a pale yellow, and fluorescent lights overhead hummed softly. On the table beside him lay a stack of papers, each meticulously annotated in his own hand. He had spent hours crafting his speech, choosing each word with care. His face was calm, almost unreadable, but beneath the surface his mind raced with the weight of the moment. Traoré had risen quickly through the ranks of Burkina Faso's military. He was young, sharp, and relentless in his pursuit of change. He had spoken out against corruption and foreign interference, promising his people a new path. Tonight he would speak to the world. He knew the risks. He knew that by airing his grievances publicly, he might provoke powerful forces and invite unforeseen consequences. Yet he also believed that silence would be betrayal. He squared his shoulders, took a steadying breath, and signaled to the technicians to begin the final checks. In the Mar-a-Lago screening room, the volume on the main speaker crackled to life. A low hum preceded the image of Traoré appearing on the screen. The camera framed him in a tight shot, his uniform crisp, insignia gleaming under the studio lights. He looked directly into the camera, his dark eyes steady and focused. The world held its breath. Trump's gaze sharpened. He watched as Traoré cleared his throat and began to speak in French with subtitles rolling beneath him. The former president knew only snippets of what was being said, but his aides translated in real time. Mentions of decades of economic exploitation, lines accusing past administrations of turning a blind eye to injustice, and a call for respect toward Burkina Faso's sovereignty. With each phrase, Trump's advisors shared quiet side comments, their voices tinged with concern. The speech unfolded at a deliberate pace. Traoré spoke of his nation's struggle for dignity, of people who toiled endlessly, yet saw little benefit. He spoke of families uprooted by conflict, of young men and women who deserved a chance to build their own futures. His words painted a vivid picture of hardship, but also of quiet determination. He did not shout. He did not rant. Instead, he spoke with a calm intensity that made every accusation feel like a living thing being laid at the feet of those who had long ignored them. Trump felt a sharp tug of unease. He was accustomed to rallies and stump speeches, to fiery rhetoric and immediate sound bites. This measured, unflinching address was different. It carried weight. It demanded a response. He shifted in his chair, brushing back his hair and glancing at the aides who had gathered details on his presidential record. He knew the world would soon expect him to speak out, to defend his legacy. Back in Ouagadougou, technicians monitored the satellite link. A small flicker on one of the screens made a technician frown, and he tapped a button to stabilize the feed. Outside the studio, a handful of onlookers, journalists, diplomats, local citizens, watched nervously. Some held their breath, hoping the broadcast would reach the widest possible audience. Others feared that the signal might be cut, that powerful interests could intervene to silence the message. Traoré continued, shifting topics to point out instances of broken promises by foreign powers. He named specific policies that had failed his country, policies that had enriched a few while impoverishing the many. He spoke of international loans that came with hidden strings, of military aid that arrived too late or carried its own costs. His tone sharpened when he described the frustration of a generation that watched from the margins as decisions were made for them, not with them. In the Mar-a-Lago room, an aide tapped Trump's arm and murmured a translation of Traoré's words. The former president's lips tightened. He had long prided himself on projecting strength, on pushing back when challenged. But here, confronted with a foreign leader's unvarnished critique, he felt something unfamiliar, a momentary panic. His mind raced through possible responses. Should he issue a statement now? Should he wait for the speech to end and then craft a careful rebuttal? Or should he ignore it altogether, hoping that the address would fade into the background noise of global news? Trump's personal communications director, a sharp-eyed woman in a tailored suit, leaned forward. "Sir, if you wait too long, the narrative will be set. We need to prepare a statement immediately." Her tone was firm but not harsh. She had learned to navigate his moods and knew when to press him. Trump nodded slowly, though his eyes never left the screen. As Traoré spoke, he paused briefly to let his words sink in. The silence was powerful. Even the microphone seemed to pick up the faint sound of his breathing. Then he resumed, veering into a reflection on global unity and mutual respect. He said that no nation, no matter how small, deserved to be treated as a footnote in another's history. He asked for an end to condescension and for a new era of true partnership. His final words were an invitation. Let us stand together, on the basis of equality, or let us at least recognize one another's shared humanity. The broadcast began to conclude. Traoré offered a measured smile, nodded once, and the screen faded to black. The silence that followed was as thick as the humid air of Mar-a-Lago's screening room. Trump leaned back, processing what he had just witnessed. His aides looked to him, awaiting direction. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but it carried a hint of the anger that lay just beneath the surface. "Get me a statement," he said, "and make it strong." The communications director jotted down notes, already shaping a draft in her mind. Outside the studio in Ouagadougou, technicians powered down the equipment. The journalists filed out into the warm night, their notebooks full of quotations and their heads buzzing with what they had heard. Some were excited by the boldness of the address, others worried about the diplomatic backwash it might cause. Either way, they knew they had just witnessed something unusual, a military leader speaking with the frankness of a politician, speaking not just to his own people, but to the world. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's aides began drafting replies, consulting legal experts, and coordinating with embassy staff. Each message was weighed for tone and potential impact. The former president himself stared at the blank screen of his laptop, considering whether to add a personal note, perhaps a video message of his own. He thought back to his own moments on live television, to the rallies that had stirred his base, to the debates that had defined his campaigns. He wondered if the same tactics would work now, or if the world had moved on. In both places, the undercurrent of tension remained. In Ouagadougou, people slept fitfully, aware that tomorrow's headlines could turn the address into a spark for larger conflicts, or perhaps open the door to dialogue. In Palm Beach, Florida, Trump and his team prepared for the next move, knowing that the eyes of the world would soon look to them for a retort. Two leaders, two continents apart, both feeling the pull of history and the weight of public perception. The stage was set for an exchange that neither side could ignore, an unfolding story that would test the art of rhetoric and the power of truth spoken live. The television screen filled the room with a gentle hum as IBRAHIM Traoré's image came into sharper focus. The lights in Mar-a-Lago's screening suite dimmed just enough to let every flicker of the satellite feed stand out. Donald Trump sat forward, elbows resting on his knees, watching the feed with an intensity that made the air feel charged. Around him, aides hovered quietly, their tablets lit up with real-time translations and background briefs. None dared breathe too loudly. as if even the softest sound might disrupt this unfolding moment. Everyone knew that once Traoré began, there would be no turning back. Traoré's face was calm and unflinching. He stood behind a wooden podium in a modest studio in Ouagadougou, Burkina Faso. The backdrop showed the national flag, its bold, red, green, and golden star standing for valor, hope, and enlightenment. Despite the simplicity of the set, there was nothing plain about the authority in his posture. His uniform, crisply pressed, adorned with his rank insignia, spoke of discipline and purpose. The captain cleared his throat and began to speak. In French, his voice measured. Instantly, subtitles appeared on the screens, translating his words into English. He started by acknowledging the trials his nation had faced: years of political upheaval, economic uncertainty, and conflicts fueled by forces far beyond its borders. He spoke of ordinary men and women who rose before dawn to make ends meet, only to return each night uncertain if their labors would truly change their lives. He described abandoned fields and empty schoolhouses, symbols of dreams deferred. With each sentence, the narrative drew in viewers, painting a picture both vivid and human. Trump's gaze remained locked on Traoré's calm delivery, his expression narrowing as he absorbed each accusation. As Traoré moved into the heart of his address, he shifted from describing woes to naming culprits. He pointed to international agreements that promised investment but delivered debt. He criticized so-called aid packages that came wrapped in conditions, often benefiting foreign contractors more than Burkinabe families. He spoke of military programs that trained officers to protect interests that were not always aligned with his country's well-being. The subtitles cast these criticisms across screens in Palm Beach like stones skipping across still water, each one rippling outward and demanding a reaction. Trump's aides exchanged glances. One of them tapped nervously on a tablet, pulling up a timeline of past foreign aid initiatives. Another scrolled through news clips of diplomatic visits and summits. Trump himself sat motionless, absorbing the gravity of Traoré's words. He had faced critics before, within his own party or across the aisle in Washington. But this was different. A foreign military leader was not merely complaining. He was delivering a carefully crafted narrative accusing the United States of exploitation and broken promises. The implications were vast. This was no routine news segment, it was a direct challenge. Traoré paused to let the point sink in. In that pregnant moment, the room in Mar-a-Lago felt heavy, as if time itself had hesitated. Then he resumed, shifting tone slightly to highlight positive possibilities. He spoke of potential partnerships built on mutual respect, where technology transfers would empower local industries rather than enrich overseas corporations. He proposed educational exchanges that would send young Burkinabe scholars abroad with the understanding they would return home to lead community projects. It was a vision both practical and inspiring, a vision implying that a different kind of engagement was not only possible, but imperative. Trump leaned back, crossing his arms. His mind raced through counter-arguments. He remembered the rhetoric he had used in past international forums, his promises of fair trade deals and respect for national sovereignty. He weighed whether to respond in kind, praising positive initiatives while rejecting the rest. But he also sensed the risk of half-hearted praise appearing dismissive or worse, patronizing. The aides around him passed him talking points, each one varying in tone from conciliatory to combative. He took a deep breath, recognizing that every word he uttered could shape diplomatic ties and domestic narratives alike. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, technicians monitored the broadcast signal. Outside the studio, a small group of reporters and local staff waited anxiously. They tracked viewership counters, hoping the feed would reach as many channels as possible without interference. They had worked late into the night to ensure smooth transmission, negotiating with satellite providers and troubleshooting line noise. For them, this was more than a job. It was a mission to let Traoré's message cut through the usual diplomatic politesse and reach audiences that often heard only sanitized summaries. Back in Palm Beach, the speech reached its crescendo. Traoré's voice grew firmer as he turned to speak of hope. He recounted tales of resilience, farmers who reinvented their crops in the face of climate change, community leaders who organized local health clinics, teachers who opened makeshift schools under trees. He celebrated a spirit that refused to be bullied or silenced. And then, just as the speech began, he laid out a challenge. Treat us as partners, not pawns. Recognize our dignity, our agency, our right to shape our own future. His gaze into the camera was both gentle and steely, as though he could see every viewer's heart and mind. Trump watched, his palms pressing into his knees. That phrase, partners, not pawns, echoed in his thoughts. It was a simple turn of phrase, but it carried weight. His aides, too, sat straighter. One of them whispered, "This will trend on social media in minutes." Someone else predicted evening talk show segments dissecting every sentence. Another suggested drafting a preliminary response to be approved and released within the hour. The pressure of immediacy settled over the room. As Traoré concluded, he offered a polite nod and a brief smile before stepping away from the podium. The screen cut to a static map showing Burkina Faso's position in West Africa. Then the broadcast feed ended. Silence followed, as if the world itself had paused to reflect. Trump remained still for a long beat, processing the directness and confidence he had just witnessed. The aides waited expectantly, not wanting to disturb the moment, but knowing that silence could be misinterpreted. Finally, Trump straightened, in his chair. He looked at his communications director, his usual bravado giving way to the seriousness of the task ahead. "Craft something that acknowledges his points on partnership," he said, his voice firm yet measured. "But remind everyone of the good work we've done, our investments, our aid programs, our defense cooperation. Make sure it reminds people that we're not just taking credit but actually delivering results." The director nodded, fingers already flying across her tablet. She would weave a response that balanced concession with assertion, striving to turn Traoré's challenge into an opportunity. Outside Mar-a-Lago, the Florida sun had fully set, leaving the night air cool and still. Inside the screening room, lights came back on as aides prepared documents, drafted statements, and coordinated with the State Department. They reached out to embassy staff in Ouagadougou, seeking clarity on any points that might need further explanation. They fact-checked data, lined up quotes from previous speeches, and even scoured social media for immediate public reaction. Each piece of information helped them plan the best way to respond without coming off as defensive. Meanwhile, halfway across the globe, Traoré walked back into his office, where maps and reports covered the walls. His military advisors awaited debriefs, and local journalists pressed him for more details on his proposals. He sensed that his address had landed harder than most expected. Some diplomats had hailed his frankness, others muttered about potential diplomatic row. Yet he remained focused on the bigger picture. He believed that honest dialogue, however uncomfortable, was the first step toward change. In both places, an unseen thread connected the moment, a live broadcast that defied comfort, zones demanding attention and respect. Trump's team mobilized to shape the narrative, while Traoré's team braced for reactions. Viewers around the world, from journalists to casual news watchers, would soon weigh in. Social media timelines would fill with clips and commentary. News sites would feature analysis articles dissecting tone, body language, and likely impacts. And amidst it all, two leaders, one former president with a loyal following and one young captain with a restless nation behind him, had met at the crossroads of live television, each daring the other to respond. The world would watch. The tension in the Mar-a-Lago screening room grew thicker as the seconds ticked by after Traoré's broadcast cut off. Trump sat very still, as if in a trance, staring at the blank screen. Around him, aides scurried quietly, their faces illuminated by the glow of laptops and tablets. Everyone knew that the next move would be critical. A single misstep could turn a merely pointed diplomatic exchange into a full-blown crisis. Trump's palms rested on his knees, and he took a steadying breath, reminding himself that he had faced high-pressure moments before. Yet this felt different, a challenge from afar, carried on invisible waves through the air, reaching across oceans and cultures. An aide stepped forward with a summary of immediate public reactions. Social media feeds were already flooded with clips of Traoré's speech, each clip looped and commented on 100 times. Some viewers praised his calm composure and honest tone. Others debated whether his words would spark meaningful change, or simply more talk. Trump's eyes flicked over the summary. Hashtags praising partnership, hashtags warning of arrogance, and even hashtags that attacked him personally. He leaned back, pressing his hands together, weighing the power of public opinion against the weight of statecraft. Meanwhile, a team of legal advisors and policy experts huddled around a table, whispering about possible diplomatic responses. They discussed how to frame a statement that acknowledged valid concerns without admitting fault. They talked over numbers, aid budgets, trade figures, defense agreements, and argued about which statistics would sound strongest. One suggested highlighting recent infrastructure projects in Africa, pointing out paved roads and improved hospitals. Another wanted to emphasize scholarship programs that sent Burkinabe students to American universities. Trump listened to snippets of these debates, nodding occasionally but reserving judgment until he had heard all the arguments. As the advisors spoke, Trump's communications director drafted several variations of a public statement. One version was firm and assertive, pushing back against Traoré's claims. Another was more conciliatory, offering to explore new partnerships and review current policies. A third combined both, opening with a conciliatory tone, then pivoting to strong reminders of America's past contributions. Each draft contained carefully chosen words meant to balance pride in past achievements with a willingness to adapt. The aides watched with bated breath, knowing Trump would choose only one path. At that moment, Trump stood and began pacing the room. The glossy marble floor reflected his shoes as he walked back and forth. He murmured snippets of replies under his breath, phrases about shared values, mutual respect, strength through partnership. His brow furrowed as he considered the possible headlines. Would the press call him weak if he offered concessions? Would they call him out if he sounded dismissive? He paused halfway across the room, glanced at the now dark screens, and then turned back toward the table where the drafts lay open. In the far corner, the chief of staff whispered something to the communications director. She nodded, then turned to Trump and said, "Sir, we can release an initial statement immediately, and then follow up with a detailed memo later. This way, we set the tone but keep our options open." Trump stopped pacing, folded his arms, and considered the suggestion. He knew speed was important. Silence could be seen as weakness, yet impulsiveness could backfire just as badly. A measured approach would require discipline, but it might pay off in the court of public opinion. Finally, Trump pointed to the conciliatory, then assertive draft. "Let's do this one," he said. "Start with the respect piece. Acknowledge the desire for partnership. Then remind everyone of what we've already done, and then finish strong." He returned to his chair as aides immediately began tailoring the language. Fingers flew across keyboards as they plugged in figures. Over $2 billion in direct investment, 300 scholarships awarded, joint military exercises conducted in partnership. They crafted each sentence to sound respectful yet firm, a tone that Trump believed fit his own style. While the statement took shape in Florida, halfway across the world in Ouagadougou, Traoré and his team also worked into the night. Journalists crowded a small briefing room, holding recorders and cameras, eager to hear more. Some asked about next steps, wondering if there would be formal talks or if this speech was simply a call for attention. Others questioned the feasibility of Traoré's proposals. How would technology transfers be negotiated? Who would oversee scholarship selections? Each question was met with calm, detailed answers. Traoré's demeanor remained composed. He spoke slowly, choosing simple words that resonated with listeners. His advisors passed him notes reminding him of press deadlines and translation requirements. Back in Palm Beach, Trump's optics team prepared visual materials to accompany the statement. Charts showing aid allocations, photos of joint events, maps marking project sites. They hoped that a mix of data and imagery would strengthen their message. The statement itself was sent to news wires and posted on official social media accounts. Almost instantly, Reporters and influencers picked it up. Alerts and push notifications buzzed across devices worldwide. Trump looked on as his team briefed him on the initial reactions. Headlines varied. Some praised the balanced tone. Others criticized him for appearing overly defensive. Opinion polls showed a slight uptick in favorable views among certain demographics and a dip among others. Trump studied the numbers, then turned to his closest advisor and said, "Keep an eye on traction. If we need to pivot, we'll release more information tomorrow." He leaned back, looking both satisfied and alert, the kind of look that said, one skirmish had been fought, but the campaign was far from over. Later that night, as the staff finally dispersed, Trump sat alone in the screening room, the screens dark around him. He reflected on how one speech from a distant leader had set off a cascade of action thousands of miles away. He felt a mix of relief that his team had responded swiftly and concern about what might come next. He knew that the next day would bring new developments, expert analyses, global headlines, perhaps even formal diplomatic outreach. For now, though, he allowed himself a moment of calm. He rose, turned off the remaining lights, and walked toward the balcony, where the soft, Florida night air greeted him. The palm trees swayed gently, and the distant waves offered a soothing rhythm. In that quiet moment, he felt both the weight of leadership and the fragile promise of dialogue, two powerful forces set in motion by a single live broadcast. Trump's eyes were sharp as he entered the secure briefing room, the echo of his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet beneath his feet. Seated around a glossy oval table were his closest aides, the communications director, the chief of staff, the legal advisor, and the national security counselor. Each wore an expression that mixed determination with a hint of anxiety. The air felt charged, as if every molecule knew that tonight's decisions could set the tone for weeks to come. Trump himself carried a folder of printed notes, the logo of his personal finance venture discreetly embossed on the cover. He laid it on the table, smoothing out the pages with one hand. The communications director began by summarizing the public reaction to the initial statement released hours earlier. "Sir, the tone was well received by many. People appreciate the offer of partnership, and the numbers we provided reinforce the positive impact we've had. However, critics say we barely addressed the substance of his concerns." She pointed to a chart showing social media sentiment. Nearly 60% mixed or negative reactions, 30% positive, and 10% neutral. Trump glanced at the figures, his lips pressing together as he considered the next move. His chief of staff chimed in. "We need to go beyond numbers. We need to show we understand his points and can adapt. Otherwise, this will be seen as another one-sided narrative." The legal advisor added, "We must also guard against praising policies we can't fully defend. Some of those aid projects face delays or issues with execution. We don't want to highlight failures." Trump nodded, absorbing every nuance. He had learned long ago that diplomacy often hinged on small details and carefully weighed phrases. Outside the window, cold Florida air met the warm glow of interior lights. The national security counselor traced a finger over a map of West Africa. "Sir, if we escalate too much, Burkinabe hardliners will use that to rally support. If we concede too much, domestic critics will accuse us of weakness. We need a middle path, clear acknowledgement of valid points paired with concrete proposals for improvement." She tapped the map at Ouagadougou, then traced lines to Washington and Brussels, illustrating the web of international relationships at stake. Trump leaned forward, steepling his fingers. He spoke slowly, choosing his words. "We need to call for a joint task force. We can propose a meeting of leaders to review aid structures, trade agreements, and security cooperation. Make it sound like a fresh start, a summit that shows respect." His voice carried the weight of someone who had stood on stages around the world, commanding attention. The aides exchanged glances. They liked the idea, but knew it would require coordination with multiple partners. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré and his foreign minister were already drafting a response to America's initial statement. They met in a conference room lined with portraits of past Burkinabe leaders. A single desk lamp cast a circle of light over stacks of paper and open laptops. Journalists and diplomats waited outside, overhearing fragments of conversation, talk of sovereignty, of fair trade, of genuine respect. Traoré's team drafted language that both welcomed a summit and laid out clear conditions. No hidden clauses, no last-minute changes, and full transparency of aid agreements. Back at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's team prepared visuals for the proposed summit, a map highlighting shared interests, photos of past collaborative efforts, and bullet points of agenda items: health, education, infrastructure, and security. They refined the summit proposal to emphasize mutual benefit. "We must be careful," the communications director cautioned. "Let's avoid language that suggests a lecture. We want co-creation, not oversight." Trump grinned, slightly. He liked the idea of co-creation. It sounded modern and respectful. As those plans solidified, the network news channels interrupted regular programming. Live feeds from both Washington and Ouagadougou appeared side by side on millions of screens. On one side stood Trump at Mar-a-Lago, ready to deliver his proposal. On the other, Traoré appeared at the Burkinabe Foreign Ministry, his expression calm but resolute. The simultaneous broadcast was unprecedented. Two leaders thousands of miles apart, speaking at the same time on linked agendas. Trump stepped to the lectern. He began by acknowledging Traoré's address, praising the captain's passion for his people and his clear vision for partnership. He spoke of America's long history of aiding developing nations and its willingness to learn from past mistakes. Then he unveiled the summit proposal, a gathering of national leaders, development experts, and civil society representatives to co-design a new framework for aid and trade. He emphasized co-creation, mutual accountability, and shared goals. As Trump spoke, Virginia footage of Burkinabe farmers, schoolchildren, and entrepreneurs played on the side screen, reminding viewers of the faces behind the policies. The audience at Mar-a-Lago included a handful of reporters and many aides, all watching closely. Trump's tone was earnest. He referenced specific projects: the borehole wells drilled in rural communities, the vocational training centers that taught technical skills, and the joint military training missions that enhanced regional security. Each example was chosen to show depth of engagement. In Ouagadougou, Traoré listened to a live feed of Trump's remarks. His brow furrowed slightly, not in anger but in concentration. When Trump finished, the foreign minister stepped forward to read the Burkinabe response. He began by expressing gratitude for the summit invitation but quickly moved to the conditions. Traoré's team had set clarity on loan terms, active participation in project management, and an independent audit of past programs. He stressed that partnership must be equal and transparent, not built on rhetoric alone. The back and forth unfolded in real time. Across both continents, analysts on news panels dissected every phrase, weighing notes on tone and intent. Social. Media lit up with comparisons: who had sounded stronger, who had offered more substance. Yet the exchange remained civilized, a rare moment of direct dialogue rather than behind closed doors diplomacy. The tension lay not in insults but in the push and pull of proposals and counterproposals. At Mar-a-Lago, aides monitored the viewership numbers and social media sentiment. The communications director pointed to rising engagement metrics: tweets with summit hashtags, articles discussing the co-creation model, and even opinion pieces by foreign policy experts noting the potential of this direct exchange. She turned to Trump and said, "This might shift the narrative from confrontation to collaboration. People are talking about partnership, not just criticism." Trump nodded slowly, absorbing the positive spin. Later that evening, as the broadcasts ended, both sides retreated to private discussions. Trump and his team reviewed the conditions set by Traoré's team, debating which could be accepted immediately and which required further negotiation. They drafted a joint communiqué, a one-page summary outlining the summit's goals, the principles of transparency, and a timeline for follow-up meetings. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's advisors prepared their own version of the communiqué, highlighting equal partnership and outlining steps for forming a joint planning commission. In the quiet hours that followed, Both leaders reflected on what had happened. Trump reviewed the night's transcripts, noting the applause lines and the areas where audiences seemed most engaged. Traoré sat in his office, staring at the draft communiqué, thinking about how this exchange might reshape his country's relationships. Both understood that the real work was just beginning. The summit they had proposed would require detailed planning, careful negotiations, and unwavering commitment from all parties. By dawn, initial responses poured in from other world leaders. Some praised the open dialogue, others watched cautiously, wondering if this model could apply elsewhere. In newsrooms across the globe, editorial boards debated the significance of a former U.S. president and a young African captain engaging in such a public exchange. For many, it marked a new chapter in diplomacy, one that embraced transparency and directness over backroom deals. Through it all, one thread remained clear. Live dialogue, unfiltered and simultaneous, had broken through the usual diplomatic protocols and captured the world's attention. It had tested both leaders, challenged their teams, and stirred imaginations about how global partnerships could evolve. And as the first light of morning touched both Mar-a-Lago's palm trees and Ouagadougou's skyline, the summit loomed on the horizon, a promise of collaboration that neither side could afford to ignore. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Mar-a-Lago, painting soft patterns on the polished marble floor. Donald Trump sat at his desk, a cup of coffee cooling beside him, as he scanned the overnight briefings. Headlines ranged from praise for his willingness to engage to critiques that he had not gone far enough. He clicked through social media threads that showed a wide array of opinions. Some applauded the idea of a summit, others worried it might be little more than a photo opportunity. Yet a steady current of excitement ran through many feeds. People were talking about real change, not just rhetoric. Trump leaned back in his chair, reflecting on the night before. He recalled the feeling of speaking directly to the world, side by side with Captain Traoré. It had felt raw and authentic, an open exchange that bypassed the usual filters. He believed that this new style of diplomacy could shape public opinion and put pressure on bureaucracies to move faster. He made a quick note to thank his communications director for pushing the summit idea, knowing it had framed the narrative as one of partnership rather than contest. Across the Atlantic, in Ouagadougou, IBRAHIM Traoré stood on the balcony of his office overlooking the city's bustling streets. Vendors arranged colorful produce at market stalls. Children in neat uniforms threaded through traffic on their way to school, and motorbikes darted between cars as the day began. He watched for a moment without speaking, drawing strength from the energy below. Then he turned back inside to join his advisors, ready to plan the next steps. In both capitals, teams of experts convened almost immediately. In Washington, State Department officials drafted an outline for preparatory talks, mapping out logistics and agenda items. They consulted people who had worked on previous summits and those who knew Burkina Faso best. Their goal was to show respect by involving Burkinabe voices in every detail. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré's foreign ministry organized a similar group to represent various sectors, civil society, business leaders, community activists, so that their concerns would be part of the summit program. Back in Palm Beach, Trump received updates on projected costs and proposed venues. He considered hosting the summit either at Camp David or at the White House, weighing factors like security, symbolism, and optics. His team leaned toward Camp David for its more informal atmosphere, which they believed would encourage genuine conversation. Trump nodded when he heard that choice. He remembered past experiences at Camp David and felt it fostered trust and camaraderie. As dawn broke over Ouagadougou, Traoré shared a meeting in the presidential conference room. He began by thanking his team for their swift work on the communiqué. Then he asked each advisor to present one key priority for the summit. The head of the Agriculture Ministry spoke of sustainable farming initiatives that could be expanded with new technologies. The Education Minister emphasized scholarship programs and teacher training. The Security Chief called for clearer guidelines on joint training exercises and respect for local command structures. Each presentation was measured and focused on concrete outcomes. Later that day, the summit dates were officially announced, 2 weeks ahead, giving both sides time to prepare. A flurry of diplomatic cables, press releases, and logistical orders followed. Embassies updated visitor lists, security agencies coordinated travel plans, and protocol officers drafted seating charts. In the media, commentators speculated on everything from likely talking points to the shape of the handshake it would conclude with. Editorial cartoons showed Trump and Traoré peering at each other over a world map, marking an era of new friends or unlikely allies, depending on the artist's view. In Palm Beach, Trump hosted a small gathering of advisors to fine-tune his opening remarks. He wanted to start with a personal anecdote about his own travels abroad, how meeting local leaders had taught him the value of listening first. He practiced in front of a mirror, adjusting his tone to sound sincere rather than scripted. His aides suggested adding a moment to recognize Burkina Faso's cultural heritage, maybe mention its music or art. Trump smiled and agreed. He liked the idea of demonstrating genuine appreciation. Meanwhile, Traoré spent an afternoon visiting a community center that his government had helped renovate. He greeted families, listened to teachers, and tried out a new computer lab. Photos of the visit appeared online almost instantly. The next morning, he included that experience in a draft of his opening statement, a brief story about how young students' hopes reminded him why he sought equal partnerships. It was a simple but powerful image, one that reporters could easily share alongside coverage of the summit. As the summit drew near, public interest soared. News outlets ran background features on both leaders, drawing contrasts and similarities. Experts debated whether this summit could serve as a model for future engagement between big and small nations. Social media challenged users to share what they would ask if they were at the table. Polls showed that many people felt optimistic, believing that when leaders spoke candidly, real progress was possible. On the eve of the summit, both Trump and Traoré prepared in private. Trump reviewed his notes late into the night, imagining potential questions Traoré might raise and rehearsing graceful ways to address them. He wrote a few key phrases on index cards: equal respect, shared vision, listening first. Traoré, in his own office, sat under the glow of a desk lamp going over his proposals one final time. He knew that he needed to strike a balance between firmness on principles and flexibility on methods, a delicate dance in any negotiation. The day of the summit began with clear skies over Camp David. Flags of the United States and Burkina Faso stood side by side at the entrance. Trump arrived in a motorcade, greeted by a small honor guard. Traoré arrived not long after, stepping out of a sleek SUV and flashing a confident, friendly smile. Reporters shouted questions, but both men focused on the task at hand. They shook hands warmly, and for a moment, cameras captured a scene of genuine camaraderie. Inside the retreat's main hall, the atmosphere was calm, yet purposeful. Delegations took their seats at a long wooden table, notebooks open and pens at the ready. Trump opened with his anecdote. Traoré responded with his story of the community center. They nodded as each other spoke, occasionally exchanging brief questions. As the talks moved into working groups, officials broke off to discuss agriculture, education, infrastructure, and security in separate rooms. Each session followed a clear timeline, with note-takers recording proposals, concerns, and agreed next steps. By the end of the first day, both sides had agreed on a draft framework, a joint planning commission to oversee new projects, deadlines for auditing existing programs, and a mechanism for regular public reporting on progress. They also set dates for follow-up meetings and outlined budget commitments. As evening fell and the summit hall emptied, Trump and Traoré stood together on a terrace overlooking the wooded grounds. They raised mugs of tea in a quiet toast to cooperation. In the days that followed, news of the summit's outcomes spread quickly. Media coverage highlighted the hands-on approach of both leaders, the clear measures they had put in place, and the spirit of partnership that had flourished in what so often becomes a staged event. Analysts praised the transparency of the process and noted that citizens in both countries felt more invested because they had watched leaders work together in real time. Back in Mar-a-Lago, Trump glanced at the post-summit coverage and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He believed that this approach, direct dialogue, practical planning, and genuine respect, could redefine how nations interact. He made notes for future initiatives, already imagining summits with other leaders. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, Traoré returned to his regular duties with a renewed sense of purpose. He visited schools, met with farmers, and checked on early progress in project sites. He knew that follow-through would be key, and he was determined to keep the momentum alive. In both places, people began to measure success not by speeches alone, but by the tangible changes that followed. New wells were drilled, teachers received training, and security patrols improved in sensitive areas. Reports came in that joint commissions were meeting regularly, that budget lines were being adjusted to meet pressing needs, and that young professionals were engaging with mentors across borders. These were small steps, but they added up to a growing sense of hope. As months passed, scholars and journalists looked back on the summit as a turning point, a moment when two leaders chose to break from routine and speak openly, then follow up with action. In classrooms, students studied the summit as a case in modern diplomacy. In think tanks, experts debated its lessons for future global partnerships. And in homes across both nations, people remembered the day when a captain from Burkina Faso and a former U.S. president met on equal footing, proving that honest dialogue and mutual respect could indeed reshape the world.